Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, and access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as guided meditation programs. Between a full-time job in IT and a full-time job in podcasting, it gets harder and harder to sit down and read the books I'm interested in. This is where Audible comes in. I can listen on my daily commute, relaxing, or while out running errands and still get in the books I've been wanting to get into. You can download titles and listen offline anytime, anywhere. The app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. Now you can try Audible risk-free with a special 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. That's audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. Don't let your busy life get in the way of that great book you've been wanting to read. Go get your free trial of Audible today. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. This is Geoffrey, and we've talked about many times before that I experience problems and struggles with my mental health, and really without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy does work. It's helped for me, but what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, or you're not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's really time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles, and it's time to start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is a customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And there's a special offer to Nerdery and Murdery listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. That's betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
You're listening to the sweet, sensual, serendipitous, and soulful sounds of Nerdery and Murdery.
God, I hate you so much. Welcome to episode 73 of Nerdery and Murdery.
73. I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery. Zig, I think you've got another good episode of Nerdery for us today, so I'll let you go ahead and take over.
We are going to get real nerdery today. We're going to talk about Palladium Books.
This
is requested by 2 geeks and a microphone and 3 geeky dads that we talk about this. So
Cool.
Palladium Books is a publisher of role-playing games, perhaps best known for its expansive Rift series, which is still being produced. It started in 1990, and they're still rolling with it. Palladium was founded in April 1981 in Detroit by current president and lead game designer Kevin Simbita, and it is now based in Westland, Michigan. The company enjoys the support of a small but dedicated fan base who praise its various game series for their innovative settings and ease of adaptability to various personal preferences, playstyles, and power levels. The first game released by Palladium Books was the Mechanoid Invasion in 1981, followed by the first edition of the Palladium role-playing game in 1983 and Heroes Unlimited. We have played Heroes Unlimited.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't play it much, but we have played Heroes Unlimited. It's a lot of fun.
That was a blast to play.
Yeah, it's a good system. Valley of the Pharaohs was released between those two, so there was also like an Egyptian game. Other popular titles include adaptations of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Robotech, which I said I would get to later on. Those Robotech books are some of the prettiest game books I've ever seen. And there's 5 or 6 of them now. But just the artwork, how they're set up, the tables that you can go through in the back of them, they're wonderful. It was also one of the major distributors of Robotech merchandise for several years. Palladium was. Between the late 1990s and the early 2000s, all of Palladium's license lapsed and were not pursued for renewal. In September of 2007, Palladium finalized negotiations with Harmony Gold USA to produce Robotech The Shadow Chronicles role-playing game, an RPG based on Robotech The Shadow Chronicles, but this license was discontinued in 2018. You could still find those books out there, though. Palladium claims it was the first publisher in the RPG industry to adopt a practice of perfect binding in its books, a move that has since been emulated by many other companies. That's basically binding where you don't have the stitching.
Mm-hmm.
Palladium also released most of its titles in paperbacks, whereas other major RPG publishers mostly published hardback editions. Palladium wanted to save money by doing hardbacks because they spent most of the money on the artwork instead. And even though the book is not as long lasting, it's worth it. I mean, those books are beautiful. The format choice also allowed Palladium to provide full source books at a lower cost than many other game lines.
Mm-hmm.
Although Palladium did not establish the use of a universal game mechanic, it was one of the first companies to successfully create role-playing games in multiple genres. For the release, its house system would be described as Megaverse, not universal. It's more than just one word. Palladium Books has licensed several of their intellectual properties to third-party developers. Only one book has ever been published by another company under license for Palladium. Rift's Manhunter from Myrmidon Press was released in December of 94. Palladium canceled the license in May of 96. In October of 2000, Rift was licensed to the now defunct Precedence Entertainment for collectible card game. And in May of 2004, Rift was licensed to create the Rift's Promise of Power video game for the failed Nokia Engage gaming platform. I think they actually released it. They just, nobody had they quit making the Engages. So in May of 2003, Palladium announced that Jerry Bruckheimer Films and Walt Disney Pictures had optioned the rights to make a film based on the Rift's RPG series.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, at that time, Bruckheimer was said to be developing the movie in conjunction with screenwriter David Franzoni. An April 19, 2006 press release asserted that until Jerry Bruckheimer has a script he loves, the movie can't get the green light. In April 14th, 2011, Weekly Update, Simbita said the film option would be renewed for a 9th year. And in April 19, 2006, Kevin Simbita issued a statement that revealed Palladium Books' critical financial difficulties due to alleged embezzlement and theft, resulting in losses from $850,000 to $1.3 million.
Wow.
Coupled with a series of delays and negotiation, license delays for their properties and other media, the Nokia Engage game, the Jerry Bruckheimer movie, and massively multiplayer online game licenses and other potential deals. They all fell through, and somebody embezzled a lot of money.
Yeah, no kidding.
There are those who say it was Kevin Simbita himself. However, no one has any proof of that. On April 26, 2006, articles in the Kingsport Times News revealed that Steve Shearing, Palladium's former sales manager, had been sentenced in a plea bargain to a misdemeanor conviction, 1 year of probation, in order to pay $47,080 in restitution to Palladium Books in connection with these thefts. It also provided more information about the thefts, which took place from 2002 to 2004 and were only discovered when Palladium took inventory. So, Steve Shearing went down for the crime, but he only had to pay back $47,000 for something that was somewhere around $1 million. Again, Palladium looked like it was going to shut down at the time. They actually didn't produce anything for a year or so, but Kevin Sambita was able to get things going again. Palladium Books and Kevin Sabita continue to receive criticism regarding the handling of Robotech RPG Tactics after a successful Kickstarter campaign raised $1.4 million from 5,342 backers, ending on May 20th, 2013. During that campaign, Palladium specified an intended release date of Robotech RPG Tactics as early as the 2013 holiday season. Shortly before expected release, Palladium Books shifted the project to spring and summer of 2014. Later, the date was shifted again to late summer or autumn of 2014, with the international backers several months after. Kevin Sabita and Palladium Books attributed the shifting dates to a number of unforeseen issues, including Chinese New Year, causing production to start later than expected.
Unforeseen Chinese New Year. I think that could be foreseen.
Yeah, it happens every year.
Yeah.
So on September 25th, 2013, update number 113 echoed the intention of a holiday release and promised Kickstarters. On September 8th, 2014, several Kickstarter backers indicated receipt of their copies of the game. While the remainder of rewards were awaited delivery from China via cargo ship, there were 6 cargo ships containing backer rewards, as an indicated in update number 156 to Kickstarter backers. The same update also provided some clarification on delivery schedules. Estimated to mid to late October 2014 as the general time Kickstarter rewards would have been available to the delivery of the backers. But on July 14, 2014, Palladium Books issued a plea to backers seeking permission to sell any available copies of Robotech RPG Tactics to attendees at Gen Con 2014, a perceived divergence from an earlier promise to make copies available to the public until backers' rewards were fully delivered. Kevin Sabita said, I announced we are planning to bring some Robotech RPG Tactic products to sell, a few hundred, 6 items, the main box game, 4 of the expansion packs, and the rule book. That would mean a few hundred people will get these items before most of the 5,200 plus Kickstarter backers. I implore you to say yes. Please give us your permission. We believe it would be disastrous not to have a small selection of items I've listed available for sale. Anyone who does not want to respond by July 21st, 2014, we will consider to be a yes. Ultimately, Palladium proceeded with the sale over the results of the survey several days before Gen Con. Palladium Books received word the shipping containers containing Robotech RPG Tactics had been tagged for inspection by U.S. Customs, subsequently blocking any opportunity to take them to the Gen Con. International backers received items by mid-April 2015, and eventually they released it. In January 2016, Kevin released a statement of the Kickstarter project page remained silent regarding the second portion of backers' rewards. On February 27th, 2018, Kevin Sabita announced they were unable to fulfill the Wave 2 rewards and due to the end of the Robotech licensing. So a lot of the backers didn't get the things that they were promised.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Sabita, much like Jim Shooter, is a controversial figure in nerd circles.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have claimed that he is tyrannical, that he doesn't follow through on all his promises, but that happens a lot in this industry. I don't think it's necessarily fair to blame Kevin Sabita, but a lot of people have said that he is really, really hard to work with because he's a perfectionist. I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, but I've never worked for the dude, so I can't say. Just want to kind of get that out there.
Right.
Palladium is aggressive in preventing wide distribution of fan-made conversions to their games to other systems, such as the D20 system, and also strongly discourages converting the intellectual property of others into their system. While they cannot prevent it, doing so is not allowed in venues owned by Palladium Books. Palladium also routinely threatens legal action against fans who distribute conversions to other venues by issuance of cease and desist orders. Sabita stated the policy has been adopted due to advice from Palladium's lawyers to shield Palladium from liability for conversion of other parties' intellectual properties. They do produce a, I think it's a quarterly magazine now, The Rifter. It is a full color magazine that is still produced. You can pick one up at a comic book shop. But again, they only release it 4 times a year, so I think that's why they can do that. The Rifter is a magazine published for all lines. So some of the other lines for Rifts, After the Bomb, a post-apocalyptic RPG that begins as an alternative campaign setting for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and other strangeness, was developed into its own series. In it, mutant animals struggle for survival, often against human supremacist nations. Beyond Supernatural is a modern horror RPG along the lines of Call of Cthulhu. An incomplete second edition core rulebook was released in July of 2005 with more information about the world, which is assumed to be similar in the real world. All of this stuff was also in Rifters. Rift Chaos Earth, a prequel to Rift set immediately after a war that triggered a magical apocalypse, opening dimensional gates that unleash monsters upon a technologically advanced future Earth. Dead Rain, a post-apocalyptic RPG where mankind is waging war on a zombie menace. Heroes Unlimited, a superhero RPG. Macross 2, based on the anime of the same name. The license has lapsed and was not renewed, but you can still find the books out there. The Mechanoid Invasion, a science fiction RPG set during the battle between human colonists and the Mechanoids, a race of psionic cybernetic beings who wish to exterminate humanoid life. Nightbane, formerly called Night Spawn, is a horror RPG set in the year 2004. Ninjas and Super Spies is based on both martial arts and espionage movies with some science fiction elements mixed in. Palladium Fantasy Role-Playing Games. This is the one that the two geeks with the microphone wanted to talk about. It's a fantasy RPG set in a unique world, which was the home of Kevin Sambita's fantasy game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, his fantasy game is very rich. It does not copy Dungeons and Dragons directly, which a lot of fantasy games do. I don't believe he ever received a cease and desist order from the Tolkien family, such as Dungeons and Dragons did, but it's a pretty rich fantasy world. You got elves, you got dragons, you got trolls, you got all these other things. It's a pretty fun campaign, and again, the artwork is beautiful. So that's definitely one people should check out. Again, go to your used bookstore. You can find it. They're still producing this game. You can go out and find it at your comic book shop as well. Also, we had Phase World, 3 Galaxy setting, a space opera science fiction offshoot of the Rifts universe. Revised Recon was originally a Vietnam War-based RPG, and it was later updated for modern-era combat involving mercenary in fictional hotspots mirroring such places as Africa and South America. The aforementioned Rifts, which is set primarily on Earth 300 years after a war triggering magical apocalypse. It opened dimensional gateways and heralding the return of magic, Atlantis, and numerous invasions by alien forces. Rifts is Palladium's flagship line. I believe at last total there was something like 78 Rifts books.
Wow.
Yeah. But the numbers were, so I could be wrong about those numbers. That's what I could find. But some of them have gone out of print and they've printed new ones and things. But basically Rifts is like GURPS. It's a generic or universal role-playing system set in this Rifts universe where you can be a guy in a full suit, like Tony Stark, or you can be a caveman fighting dinosaurs. All of that happens in Rifts. Robotech, based on the anime series of the same name. The Robotech license, again, has been lapsed, but there are bits out there. You can find those Shadow Chronicles books, but they are rare as hen's teeth. They will cost you a pretty penny unless you find them in like a used bookstore. Splicers is a post-apocalyptic RPG where humans have turned to organic technology to fight a robotic threat. So basically like a cyberpunk. System Failure is a post-apocalyptic game in which the Y2 bug heralded the collapse of the powers and telecommunications grid with the arrival of extra dimensional energy bugs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness was based on the original comic book. However, due to waning sales blamed on the childish nature of the original television cartoon, the license was not renewed when it expired in 2000. Many concepts established in TMNT continued in both Heroes Unlimited and After the Bomb. And finally, Valley of Pharaohs, which is a historic RPG set in ancient Egypt.
Did a lot of post-apocalyptic games.
That's kind of where their wheelhouse is. That's what they do. That's what they do the best.
Yeah.
Weird world, post-apocalyptic. Weapons is a 1981 fantasy role-playing game supplement produced by Turtle Press. It's a compendium of virtually every edged or impact melee weapon used in any medieval or primitive culture. Weapons is an index source book described hundreds of different melee weapons, each illustrated. Weapons are covered in 6 sections: swords, knives, hafted weapons, spears, polearms, and miscellaneous. And they actually entered into a thing with Palladium Books. It was developed out of Palladium Books of Weapons and Armor. It was the first of several books compiled for Palladium. So they do have a license with this particular book, Weapons. You could still pick up Weapons. I think it's still being produced. I have no idea what issue it's on at this point, but I want to say it's probably 6 or 7, because the first one was in 81. Now Lewis Pulsifer reviewed Weapons in the Space Game, Gamer number 43. Pulsifer commented that, in my view, there is no need to add weapons to those already in most FRPGs, but if you must, you'll need to look at them up in a good source to get some details. 10 times as much information about a 10th as many weapons presented more professionally would have much more useful. In short, Weapons is virtually useless. Wow. I disagree. Yeah, I wanted to go through that. That dude doesn't know what the hell he's talking about.
Huh.
I can tell you this, with Rifts, it takes a long time to build a character. You got to figure out what they're going to be, and you have so many choices. But once you get it built, Rifts is a lot of fun to play. It goes quickly. The combat is not too bad. Heroes Unlimited was a lot of fun. It took us a while to roll up the characters. It was a lot of fun to play.
Yep.
I think I've played the Rifts fantasy game once, and same thing. Hard to roll up the characters because there's a lot of things you need to check off, read through the books, look at them. Just read the book before you start making the character.
Mm-hmm. That's
just your best bet. Read the source book, get familiar with it, and then try to figure out what kind of character you're going to make, and it should make it a little easier. The dice systems, which I don't have a whole lot of notes on those because they are all different. I can tell you the Rift dice system works pretty well. The Heroes Unlimited worked pretty well, I seemed. And we use a lot of percentiles in that.
Yep.
I seem to remember. Yeah.
Yep.
But it was pretty easy, pretty, rolling against tables. The tables were pretty readily available. Kevin Sambita is still the head of Rifts. He's still running, or the head of Palladium. He's still running it. Again, there's some controversy around him, but the man does put out a good product. I can't fault him for that. Maybe some of the problems with the Kickstarter and things like that, I can see that adding to the mythos that Kevin Sambita is hard to work with, but some of that may have been beyond his control.
Right.
Plus the embezzling charge that the other guy had. And again, there are people who say that Kevin Sambita was in on that embezzling. I don't think so, because he nearly had to shut his doors down. And he was able to bring Palladium Books back. And he's been running Palladium Books since 1981. Why would you embezzle from that? He owns the company. That just doesn't make any sense to me. The sales manager embezzling makes a hell of a lot more sense.
Well, you never know what's going on behind the scenes.
That's true.
There could be anything going on behind the scenes that would cause him to cause the need to embezzle from his own company. Yeah. It happens.
Yeah. It does happen. He was never charged with anything. It all went down on this one sales manager. So I'm inclined to believe that that's what really happened. But I mean, Palladium Books we really thought it was dead for a couple of years, but they brought it back and they're still producing things. I have a Rifter magazine from I don't know, 4 or 5 issues ago, so it's a couple of years old now. But I like to browse through that thing just to look at the artwork. It's beautiful, but it's just a resource for everything that Palladium's doing. And the fact that they're still producing a magazine blows me away.
Is it a physical magazine versus
It
a
is.
digital, or is it
Physical, full color magazine.
wow?
You can still pick it up at comic book shops. You got to buy it. I want to say it's like $6, but yeah,
Right.
yeah, they
Wow.
release it quarterly now. They used to release it monthly, but yeah, it's amazing. And it's got tips, tricks, stuff that they're coming out with, little modules. It's like the old fashioned gaming magazine we used to get back in the 80s.
I love those old gaming I miss those old gaming magazines.
Yeah. Yeah. Then they have like hey, here's a new monster for this game. Check it out with the stats and stuff on it. Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, you'd have to get the magazine to get the latest errata and
Yep.
new rules changes and everything like
Yep.
that.
Yep. So yeah, the Rifter is out and doing that. But that is about it for Palladium games or Palladium books. I'm sorry. They don't call themselves Palladium games. It's Palladium books. Get out there and play these games. The books themselves are worth having just to have them.
Well, by this point, it's episode 73. You've covered enough RPGs that have enough volumes on it. You need a whole library just to dedicate to with shelves and shelves of this stuff.
That's true. That's true. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to play. I've never played the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game,
Neither
but I
have
hear
I.
it's a lot of fun. I don't know about the Valley of Pharaohs. I've never even seen it. But if it's half as good as half the stuff that they've got, it's probably a pretty good pitch too, especially if you're into archaeology.
Yeah.
But that's about it for Palladium Books, kids.
Awesome. Good stuff. Glad to cover another RPG. Good information there. So with that, we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off Mental Floss, Wikipedia, and the Cleveland Police Museum. And for today, I am covering the Cleveland Torso Murderer.
The Cleveland Torso Murderer?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So this is set during the 1930s, and Cleveland was a city on the rise. The population continued to grow and become a melting pot of laborers needed to support the economically powerful steel and manufacturing base, and Millionaires Row was in its heyday. The Great Lakes Exposition and Republican National Convention were slated for 1936, as were many other conferences and conventions. And despite the effects of the Great Depression, people were beginning to get on their feet again. And there was a lot going on in Cleveland in 1936. It was then the sixth biggest city in the United States, and Cleveland sold itself as the city of conventions, welcomed travelers to downtown through its new Union Station, with a variety of fancy hotels nearby and state-of-the-art public auditorium. Against this backdrop of a large city improving economically, one of the most prolific and gruesome serial killers of all time carried out his acts of horror, distracting the citizens of the city from the pride and prosperity of the times. The Cleveland Torso Murderer, also known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, was an unidentified serial killer who was active in Cleveland in the 1930s. The killings were characterized by dismemberment of 12 known victims and the disposal of their remains in the impoverished neighborhood of Kingsbury Run. Most of the victims came from an area of Kingsbury Run called the Roaring Third or Hobo Jungle, known for its bars, gambling dens, brothels, and vagrants. And despite an investigation into the murders, at which one time was led by famed lawman Elliot Ness, then Cleveland's public safety director, the murderer was never apprehended.
Oh, yeah. I remember this. Elliot Ness did go after a serial killer. I've heard some stuff about this.
Yep. And so this is that story.
Nice.
The official number of murders attributed to the Cleveland Torso Murderer is 12, although recent research has shown there could have been as many as 20. And there were 12 known victims that were killed between 1935 and 1938.
Wait a minute. They can't tell if it was a dozen or 20 torsos that they found?
Well, they're not sure if the 20 are attributed to the same killer. They're sure of 12.
They know he did 12.
Yes, he or she.
He or she, yeah, because
Yes,
they don't know.
Could be a she. It's highly unlikely that it's a she. Most serial killers are men, although we have had female serial killers as well, but most are men.
Yes.
Some investigators, including lead detective Peter Morello, believe that there may have been 13 or more victims in Cleveland, Youngstown, and Pittsburgh areas between the 1920s and 1950s. Two strong candidates for addition to the initial list of those killed are the unknown victim named the Lady of the Lake, who was found on September 5th, 1934, and Robert Robertson, found on July 22nd, 1950.
Oh, wow.
Might have gone as that late. The victims of the torso murderer were usually drifters whose identities were never determined, although there are a few exceptions. Victims numbers 2, 3, and 8 were identified as Edward Andrassy, Florence Palillo, and possibly Rose Wallace, respectively. Edward Andrassy and Florence Palillo were both identified by their fingerprints, while Rose Wallace was tentatively identified via her dental records. The victims appeared to be lower-class individuals, easy prey in Depression-era Cleveland. Many were known as working poor who had nowhere else to live but the ramshackle Depression-era shantytowns or Hoovervilles in the area known as the Cleveland Flats. The torso murderer always beheaded and often dismembered their victims, occasionally severing the victim's torso in half or severing their appendages. In many cases, the cause of death was the decapitation or dismemberment itself. Oh.
Wow.
Most of the male victims were castrated. Some victims showed evidence of chemical treatments being applied to their body, which caused the skin to become red, tough, and leathery. Many of the victims were found after a considerable amount of time following their deaths, occasionally in excess of a year. And in an era where forensic science was largely in its infancy, these factors further complicated identification, especially since the heads were often undiscovered. During the time of the official murders, Elliot Ness held the position of Public Safety Director of Cleveland, as I said before, which was a position of authority over the police department and ancillary services, including the fire department. And while Ness actually had little to do with the investigation, his posthumous reputation as leader of the Untouchables made him an irresistible character in modern torso murder lore. Ness did contribute to the arrest and interrogation of one of the prime suspects, Dr. Francis E. Sweeney, and in addition, Ness personally conducted raids into hobo shanties and eventually burned down Kingsbury Run, from which the killer took his victims. His reasoning for burning down the shanty towns was to catalog fingerprints to easily identify any new victims, and stated it was also done to get possible victims out of the area in an attempt to stop the murders. 4 days after the shantytown burning on August 22, 1938, Ness launched an equally draconian operation of questionable legality where he personally dispatched 6 two-man search teams on a large area of Cleveland, stretching from the Cuyahoga River to the East 55th Street to Prospect Avenue under the guise of conducting fire inspections. This area of the city had long been supposed as the location of the torso murder's laboratory. Among the detectives dispatched and charged to look for signs of the torso murder's activities in the area were Detective Orly May, Emil Musil, Peter Morello, and Martin Zalewski. These were men who had worked the case from the beginning and must have felt the frustrations of the case most strongly. While the search never turned up any new or incriminating information that could lead to the arrest and conviction of the torso murderer, the systematic search did serve to focus renewed public attention on the inadequate and unsanitary living conditions in the downtown Cleveland area. The team uncovered hundreds of families living in hazardous fire traps without toilets or running water. In the interests of social reform did ultimately come to light, even if those of law enforcement did not. At one point in time, the killer taunted Ness by placing the remains of 2 victims in full view of his office in City Hall.
Wow.
The man who Elliot Ness believed was the killer would also provoke him by sending him postcards. There was a second victim who was also considered to be a victim of the torso killer in 1950 named Robert Robertson due to the fact that his head was also cut off. Only three victims were positively identified. The other 10 were 6 John Does and 4 Jane Does. Several non-canonical victims were commonly discussed in connection with the torso murder. As we talked about earlier, the nickname Lady of the Lake was found near Euclid Beach on the Lake Erie shore on September 5th, 1934. A young man found the lower half of a woman's torso, thighs still attached but amputated at the knees, washed up on the shore of Lake Erie just east of Bracknell. Cuyahoga County Coroner A.J. Pierce noted some of the chemical preservative on the skin, which had turned it red, tough, and leathery. Only parts of her were found and matched with parts found at another shore in Perry. She had an abdominal scar likely from a uterus removal, which was common and made it more difficult to identify her. And after she was found, people began reporting seeing body parts in the water, including a group of fishermen believed to have seen the head. The head, however, was never found. She was found virtually in the same spot as victim number 7. Some researchers of the torso murder victims count the Lady of the Lake as victim number 1 or victim 0. Like the Lady of the Lake, a year later, John Doe 1 had perhaps a substance on his skin, though his skin abnormalities could be possibly due to burning. So when his body was found, however, the similarities were not connected. 2 teenage boys discovered the decapitated, emasculated corpse of a white male at the base of Jackass Hill, where East 49th Street dead ends into Kingsbury Run. The body was naked save for a pair of socks and was clean and drained of blood, and there were rope burns on both of his wrists. Coroner Pierce determined the cause of death had been decapitation. Fingerprints identified this victim as Edward Andrassy, who was a 28-year-old white male. Andrassy had an arrest record and was rumored to be homosexual and frequented the Roaring Third. Police discovered a second body nearby, also decapitated and emasculated, and it appeared to be covered with the same chemical preservative as the Lady of the Lake. This body apparently had been dead at least a couple of weeks, and the 40-year-old white male was never identified. The chemical was believed to have been a substance using lime chloride. It's supposed that the killer meant to use a quickening lime to decompose the bodies quicker, but mistakenly used lime, which would preserve the bodies instead. In January of 1936, a woman discovers about half the body of a female neatly wrapped in newspaper and packed in 2 half-bushel baskets. The baskets were left alongside the Hart Manufacturing Building on Central Avenue near East 20th Street, and everything except the head was recovered about 10 days later in a vacant lot on nearby Orange Avenue. As in the case of Edward Andrassy, the cause of death had been decapitation. For some reason, however, the killer had waited for rigor mortis to set in before disarticulating the rest of the body. Fingerprints again would allow the identification of one Florence Palillo, waitress, barmaid, and prostitute, and at the time of her death, she resided at East 32nd Street in Carnegie, right on the edge of the Roaring Third. In June of 1936, early one morning in Kingsbury Run, 2 young boys discovered the head of a white male wrapped in a pair of trousers close to the East 55th Street Bridge. Police found the body of the 20-some-year-old male the next day dumped in front of the Nickel Plate Railroad Police Building. It was clean and drained of blood, and the corpse was intact except for the head, and Pierce again determined the death had been caused by decapitation. In spite of a fresh set of fingerprints on the presence of 6 distinctive tattoos on various parts of the body, police were never able to identify the victim. A plaster reproduction of the man's head, along with a diagram of the kind and location of the tattoos, were made to display at the Great Lakes Exposition of 1936. More than 100,000 people saw the death mask and tattoo chart. The tattooed man was never identified. The original death mask, along with the 3 others from the case, are on display still at the Cleveland Police Museum.
It tattoos in the 1930s?
Uh-huh.
It's a sailor.
Most likely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because most people who had tattoos at the time were people who'd been to the South Pacific.
Yeah. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. I'm sorry. It was a thought.
No, it's fine. In July
Could have been a merchant marine, maybe not necessarily a Navy guy.
Oh, sure. Right. In July of 1936, a teenage girl came across the decapitated remains of a 40-year-old white male walking through the woods near Clinton Road and Big Creek on the west side. The victim had been dead about 2 months, and his head, as well as a pile of bloody clothing, was found nearby. Judging from the enormous amount of quantity of blood that had seeped into the ground, this man had been killed apparently where his body was found. In 1936, in September, a transient tripped over the upper half of a man's torso while trying to hop a train at East 37th Street in Kingsbury Run. Police searched a nearby pool, which was nothing more than a big open sewer, and found the lower half of a torso and parts of both legs. Police sent divers down to make the recovery.
Yeah.
Yep. The number
Well, wait, it's the 30s. They were in those full suits.
Yeah. The number of onlookers that turned out to watch the grim spectacle was estimated at over 600, and the killer may have well been among them. Victim number 6 was in his late 20s, and the cause of death, yet again, was decapitation.
Is this guy hitting these people with a sword?
I don't know. They're saying killed by decapitation, so they're being killed while their head's being sawed off, cut off, whatever. It's horrifying.
I'm just thinking it's got to be quick.
Well, in this one, Coroner Pierce noted the lack of hesitation marks and the disarticulation of the body indicated a strong, confident killer very familiar with the human anatomy, because in this one, the head had been cut with one bold, clean stroke, and the victim died instantly. Identification was never made of this victim.
Okay.
In February 1937, a man found the upper half of a woman's torso washed up on the east shore of Bracknell. And unlike all previous victims, the cause of death had not been decapitation. This had happened after she was already dead. The lower half of the torso washed ashore 3 months later at about East 30th Street. The woman was in her mid-20s, and she was never identified.
Oh.
In June of 1937, a teenage boy discovered a human skull under Lorraine Carnegie Bridge. Next to it was a burlap bag containing the skeletal remains of what turned out to be a petite black woman about 40 years old. Dental work allowed for the unofficial identification of her to be Rose Wallace of Scoville Avenue, and police followed every lead on her, but they led nowhere. In July of 1937, there were labor problems in the flats that summer, and the National Guard had been called in to maintain order. And there was a young guardsman standing watch by the East 3rd Bridge when he saw the first piece of victim number 9 in the wake of a passing tugboat. Over the next few days, police recovered the entire body except for the head from the waters of the Cuyahoga River. The abdomen had been gutted and the heart ripped out, clearly indicating a new element of viciousness in the killer's approach. The victim was in his mid to late 30s, and he was never identified. In April of 1938, a young laborer on his way to work in the flats saw what he thought first was a dead fish along the banks of the Cuyahoga River. Closer inspection revealed it to be the lower half of a woman's leg, the first piece of victim number 10. A month later, police pulled 2 burlap bags out of the river containing both parts of the torso and most of the rest of the legs. For the first time, Coroner Gerber detected drugs in the systems. And were the drugs used to immobilize the victim, or was she an addict? And the answer might come when they found the arms, though, which they never did, and she was never identified. In August 1938, three scrap collectors foraging in a dump site at East 9th and Lakeside found the torso of a woman wrapped in a man's double-breasted blue blazer, and then wrapped again in an old quilt. The legs and arms were discovered in a recently constructed makeshift box wrapped in brown butcher paper and held together with rubber bands, and the head had been similarly wrapped. Gerber noted that some of the parts looked as if they had been refrigerated, and while searching for more pieces, the police discovered the remains of a second body only yards away. These 2 bodies had been placed in a location that was in plain view from Elliot. These were the 2 that were placed from Elliot Ness's office window, almost as if taunting him, and both victims 11 and 12 were never identified. 3 headless victims were found in Boxcar near McKee Rocks, Pennsylvania on May 3rd, 1940. All bore similar injuries to those inflicted by the Cleveland killer. Dismembered bodies were also found in swamps near Newcastle between the years 1921 and 34, and between 1939 and 1942. In September 1940, an article in the Newcastle News refers to the killer as the Murder Swamp Killer. The almost identical similarities between the victims in the Newcastle to those in Cleveland, Ohio, coupled with the similarities between Newcastle's Murder Swamp and Cleveland's Kingsbury Run, both of which were directly connected by a Baltimore and Ohio railroad line, were enough to convince the Cleveland detective Peter Morello that the Newcastle murders were the work of the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Morello was convinced that the connection was the railroad that ran twice a day between the two cities, and he often rode the rails undercover looking for clues to the killer's identity. On July 22nd, 1950, the body of 41-year-old Robert Robertson was found at the business of 2138 Davenport Avenue in Cleveland. Police believe he had been dead 6 to 8 weeks and appeared to have been intentionally decapitated. His death appeared to fit the profile of the other victims. He was estranged from his family and had an arrest record and drinking problem and was on the fringes of society. Despite widespread newspaper coverage linking the murder to the crimes in the 1930s, detectives investigating Robertson's death treated it as an isolated crime. In 1939, the torso killer claimed to have killed a victim in Los Angeles, California, but an investigation only uncovered animal bones. In addition to the murders in Cleveland, it is also suspected there are connected murders before and after in Sandusky and Youngstown, as well as Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and Selkirk, New York. If they are connected, this would raise the body count and raise more questions about travelability. It would also create a longer timeline of murders and victims over the span of years, in a time where most major travel was still by railway, and Cleveland was being a major hub between some of these cities. It would be much more difficult to find viable suspects. Authorities did interrogate around 9,100 people during the investigation to find the torso murderer, and although the case became the biggest police investigation in Cleveland history, many were investigated and 1,000 crimes were solved from the dedicated police investigation. So because of their investigations into this, they solved
some other crimes. Yeah, I didn't kill nobody. I did rob this jewelry store.
Right.
I'll cop to that, but I didn't kill nobody and cut their heads off. That's messed up.
There were only two main suspects of the torso murders, Frank Dozel and Francis E. Sweeney. On August 24th, 1939, Cleveland resident Frank Dozel, 52, who was at one point lived with Palillo and had connections to Andrassy and Wallace, was arrested as a suspect in Florence Palillo's murder, but he later died in suspicious circumstances in the Cuyahoga County Jail while in the custody of Cuyahoga County Sheriff Martin O'Donnell. Dozel was posthumously exonerated of involvement in the torso slayings. Willie Johnson was an African-American male who was once a suspect also, and he had been identified by a witness while disposing of a body. He had links to two of the victims, Rose Wilson and Flo Palillo, and Willie Johnson was not officially tried for the torso murders. However, he was tried for a different murder, and he was sent to the electric chair in March of 1944. Most investigators consider the last murder to have been in 1938 instead of 1950 with the other one.
Mm-hmm.
One suspected individual was Dr. Francis E. Sweeney, who was born May 5th, 1894. Sweeney was a veteran of World War I who was part of a medical unit that conducted amputations in the field, and after the war, Sweeney became an alcoholic due to pathological anxiety and depression derived from his wartime experiences. Additionally, during his military service, Sweeney was gassed in combat, which resulted in nerve damage. Sweeney was later personally interviewed by Elliot Ness, and before the interrogation, Sweeney was detained, and he was found to be so intoxicated that he was held in a hotel room for 3 days until he sobered up.
Hmm.
During his interrogation, Sweeney is said to have failed to pass 2 very early polygraph machine tests. Both tests were administered by polygraph expert Leonard Keeler, who told Ness he had his man. Ness apparently felt there was little chance of obtaining a successful prosecution of the doctor, especially as he was the first cousin of one of Ness's political opponents, Congressman Martin L. Sweeney, who had hounded Ness publicly about his failure to catch the killer. After Sweeney committed himself, there were no more leads or connections that police could assign to him as a possible suspect. From his hospital confinement, Sweeney sent threatening postcards and harassed Ness and his family into the 1950s, and the postcards only stopped after arriving after his death. Sweeney died in a veterans hospital in Dayton on July 9, 1964. Sweeney was a viable suspect, but the evidence was circumstantial and would have no bearing. He had a doctor's office on the street where a man named Emil Froelich said a doctor tried to drug him in 1934. His story was discounted as he could not relocate the building with the police the next day. And upon finding a victim with drugs in her system and looking through buildings, it was found Sweeney did have an office next to a coroner in an area where Fronek had suggested he had been drugged. He would practice in their morgue and would then create a clean and easy place to kill victims and not leave a mess due to the building being used to hold the dead anyway. Then the taunting postcards that would only make sense since Ness knew what was going on, and irony that the last bodies were placed so he could see them from home and for the killer to prove they would not be caught. In 1997, another theory postulated that there may have been no single butcher of Kingsbury Run because the murders could have been committed by different people, and this was based on the assumption that the autopsy results were inconclusive. First, Cuyahoga County Coroner Arthur J. Pierce may have been inconsistent in his analysis of whether the cuts on the bodies were expert or slapdash. Second, his successor, Samuel Gerber, who began to enjoy press attention from his involvement in such cases as the Sam Shepard murder trial, garnered a reputation for sensational theories. Detective Peter Morello believed that the torso murderer could be a transient who was riding the rails, and especially because most of the murders have occurred within the vicinity of the railroad tracks. He believed this was the reason why the other murders in other states were similar to the torso murders in Cleveland. Therefore, the only thing known for certain was that all the murder victims were dismembered, and Elliot Ness is said to have taken the identity of the killer's name to his grave. In late 1938, the Cleveland police read a letter purportedly from the killer, quote, "You can rest easy now. I have come out to sunny California for the winter." The killer claimed to have killed someone and buried their body on the Century Boulevard between Crenshaw and Western in Los Angeles, but no body was ever found. In 1947, though, a woman later identified as Elizabeth Short was found murdered in Leimert Park in Los Angeles. Short was cut in half, her intestines removed, and she was drained of blood, all similar hallmarks to the torso murderer, and she became known as the Black Dahlia.
Black Dahlia, yes.
And her murder has one more thing in common with the torso murderer.
Never caught.
It remains unsolved.
Never caught.
And that is the story of the Cleveland torso murderer.
I have a question.
Okay.
Because it occurred to me about 10 minutes ago. And I don't even know how to say it. Is it possible that the murders were committed in a different way? Like they were just different murders and they went to this dude to get cleaned?
You talking about Dr. Sweeney?
Yeah. Yeah. Could he have just been like a fixer?
Sure.
Like, hey, yeah, I murdered homegirl, or homegirl, died of an overdose. I got to get rid of her body.
Sure.
Oh, I know what to do. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. It could have been. I mean, it could have been. It could have been anybody at that point. I mean, Dr. Sweeney seems to be a pretty, I think, a pretty good suspect, but they've never proven anything beyond a shadow of a doubt.
That's true. That's true.
And nobody has ever proven anything. Nobody's actually ever been arrested for them, and to this day, it remains an unsolved murder, and who knows if this is one that will ever be solved.
Right on.
So, thanks for joining me for that.
Thank you, sir. That was very, very fascinating.
And that'll take us to the end of another recording week. So, as always, you can find us on nerderymurdery.com, where you can find the links to our episode, pictures from what we've talked about. You can also find our contact information, where if you wish to contact us about things you want to hear, things you don't want to hear, things you like, things you don't like, we do listen to it all.
We also have a YouTube channel that's got videos of us doing our thing, plus playlists and other videos we find amusing. It's a Nerdery and Murdery YouTube channel.
Thank you. You can also find our merchandise on our webpage, where if you wish to show off your Nerdery and Murdery fandom, please do check out what we have to offer there. And you can also find the link to our Patreon. So if you wish to become a donator to the show, help us with our costs that go along with this show. With your donation, you do get episodes early, plus you get exclusive episodes that are only available to our patrons. We do put information on our website about it, but the episode itself is exclusive to our patrons.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. And last, please remember to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It helps us, and it helps people find our content that might be looking for us. So with that,
I have been Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery.
Cue the music.